Welcome back to another video tutorial for Introduction to Solid Modeling. In this video we're going to cover some of the tools we can use to add further clarity to a drawing or just make it easier to understand in general. So we're going to start with this part. It's kind of an extreme ratio of its height to its width or length. It's going to present some challenges whenever we try to make this drawing and then also dimension some of these features. So if I pull in a front view, and I'll go ahead and make this as big as I possibly can so that it fits comfortably on the sheet size. So if we stick with a 1 to 9 scale, that's about as big as you probably want, just so it doesn't look overcrowded. But we can't really tell what's going on with any of these features. Like, it's going to be difficult for me to add a diameter and a locating dimension and also these spacings with you also getting a good understanding of what's going on in the part. So what I can do is use a tool that we have at our disposal called a detail view, and that is under the drawing tab and then just detail view, and it allows me to zoom in and essentially draw a sketch around one of these features. And if I place it up here, this will automatically double the size, but let's say for example I want to make it even larger just so it's easier to understand, and let's say I want to make this like 7 to 9 or something. We can more easily see what this feature actually is, right? Now I'm actually able to add smart dimensions and a diameter. Now people actually understand, or if whoever was going to manufacture this would have a better understanding of what each of these holes actually are without having to squint and try and figure out what's going on. So the way we would typically dimension stuff, I guess, based on our current knowledge would be, you'd add a dimension from the left edge to the first hole, and then from here to the second hole, or even you might do the dimension between the two holes, and then you might do that all the way down. There are better ways to do this. The first thing you could do is, we've already located the first hole, so I don't really need to worry about that. But in this instance where there's an equal spacing between the holes, you can just add a dimension between the holes. It's going to say 10 inches, and we can count. You can either count the number of times that we use that spacing, so I think it's 10 in our case, and you can just go into the dimension text like we did for when we were talking about hole diameters earlier, and type in 10x, and now they'd understand that there's 10 different intervals. Or you could also, instead of doing 10x, just type in TYP, which stands for typical, and that would also indicate that these holes are spaced 10 inches apart. And while I'm at it, not to forget, I can add a 10 times up here, so I understand that there's 20 of these because there's 2 rows. So there's 20 holes, and they understand that each of them are spaced 10 inches apart. I could do that, but let's say that these weren't spaced consistently. An easy way for me to tell them all of these dimensions without stacking, like I was, probably how you would go about it right now, we can do what's called an ordinate dimension, and that's underneath the Smart Dimension tool and just kind of right in the middle. And that will allow me to select a datum, which is just a line that we're going to measure everything from. And then I can go and select each of these hole locations individually. And as I do that, you see this number is updating, and it's measuring from where that 0 is. And this is really helpful for parts that are going to be CNC'd or put into some type of, I guess, CNC machine in general, because the code that they use, I believe this is how they actually have to program it. Like they'll say put a hole at 1, put a hole at 11, 21, instead of defining a spacing. So this works really well for that. But now you can see this is a whole lot cleaner and easier to understand than if I were to stack 10-inch dimensions all the way down, or even worse, to like measure and go all the way down. You'd have dimensions starting here and ending way down here based on the number of them that you'd actually have to add. So this is just a good way to make sure that our drawings are a little bit easier to read. I'm going to show you another tool that I don't think is super applicable in this case, just because we can't really cut out enough dead space to use this tool and still show everything we need to show. But for example, let's say this plate only had holes at the beginning and holes at the end. Instead of having this detail view, I could make this scale much larger, maybe even just 1:1. So now we have, like, these holes are large enough that I can dimension to them, but obviously now the length of the part is such that it doesn't fit on this view. So I can use what's called a break view, and that's also under the drawing tab. If I select break view, it will allow me to add a cut here, and let's say, for example, we'll choose, say it had holes on the front and in the middle and then at the end. So I can start a cut here and then end it here. And you can see everything that was between those two lines has now been, condensed or compressed into that hole. It doesn't longer, or in that gap, and it doesn't really show it anymore. So if I wanted to add another one, just to get to the end, and maybe it doesn't quite fit with 1:1, so we made it slightly smaller. Now we can still have all these dimensions, 0, 1, 51, 111, and 120. We have all the critical dimensions, but I no longer really need this detail view. These details are big enough now that I could just add, the diameter to this without it being pretty difficult to read. So the three tools that we used on this and that I find pretty helpful in general are detail view and break view, and then we also used an ordinate dimension. So let's say you find yourself creating a part that is hollow, and yes, this is hollow, you can't really tell right now, but I'll go ahead and create a drawing. So if I add views of this part, we're probably going to add an isometric up here so we can see it, and then we would probably add a front and a top probably. But if this is hollow, how am I going to indicate to the person that is manufacturing this how thick the wall is, or the thickness of the material? We can't see inside of it, at least with all these standard views, but we can use a tool called a section view, and you can see all these cutting line options that allow us to change the direction. But essentially I'm going to add a line cut straight down the middle, and you can see these arrows. The direction those arrows are pointing is essentially I've cut this cylinder in half and I'm looking at the left side of it. If I wanted to flip the direction, there's a button right here that'll allow me to look at the other side. In this case, they're exactly the same because it's a uniform or symmetrical part. But now you can see I added this section view, and now I would be able to easily, add a dimension for the width of this. And that is, again, that's under drawing and section view. And that just about covers these tools that are probably the most popular for use in parts. There are a few of these that will be more helpful in the future in assemblies or maybe even in more complicated parts, but we'll cover those in a different video. Thanks.